Welcome to the Are We Idiots Show, where we question the status quo on society's important issues while mixing in plenty of laughs along the way. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hey, it's good to be back home again. John Denver, Richie. You're like John Denver, right?
Big fan of Take Me Home Country Road.
We're back, folks. Welcome again to the Are We Idiots Show. How'd you like that entry, Rich?
You have one of the most soothing voices I've ever heard.
Now I know he's lying. We are your hosts, as always, Mark Weaver and Richard Kroll. Back from vacation, and as promised, we have lots of good content coming up in the episodes ahead. Richie, what do you got for our tip of the day or words of wisdom? We've never really defined that segment, but what do you got for our listeners today?
Here's a good one. Here's a time saver for all our listeners, all two of them. Maybe you're up to three. I think somebody from France just signed up. So I've had a lot of medical/insurance calls lately. Just went through a period where I had a colonoscopy, and then there was a There was a sample taken for pathology, and my little girls, getting their braces fixed, and
You have that long-term ED problem.
that's been addressed.
Oh, I wasn't supposed to mention
No,
that.
not on the air anyway. I've had some cortisone shots in my lower back, and so I'm on the phone a lot the last 2 weeks with insurance providers and medical, and they all have an automated attendant that asks you to say your name and your date of birth and your account number and all this info.
Right.
You get through all that, and then you get to a customer service person.
They ask you
like,
again.
hey, can you tell me who this is, your date of birth and your account number?
Yeah.
And it's everybody.
Yeah.
And I ask them why do I have to do this again?
Right.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. So here's a little tip, people. When they ask for that on the automated attendant, just ignore it and hit 0 20 times, or just hit to ask for because
Representative.
You're going to have to ask. You're going to have to put it all in again, and it's very annoying.
That's what you do. You save people time.
I'm a time saver. I'm giving back to society. I'm making people more productive.
We like that. And you had a message for our patrons as well, right? Or our future patrons.
Folks, listen, most of the people that listen to the show are my friends and family because Mark doesn't have that many friends and family.
I guess you're going to have to prove me wrong and have some of your friends buck up then, right?
Well, apparently you have closer friends and family because none of mine are stepping up. So, friends and family of Rich Kroll.
Both of them.
I'm 3 now. I got a friend in France. Can you send us $5 a month? This show costs Mark a lot of money because I sure as heck ain't paying for it. So somebody step up, be a patron, a gold patron, a platinum patron. It's only $5 a month. It helps us pay for the internet costs and the hosting costs and the audio costs and new T-shirts for Mark because he has awful clothes.
And patrons get a nice gift from us too, by the way.
Wow.
If you need further instructions how to become a patron, but you can go to our website, areweidiots.com, go to supporting listeners, and there's many options to support us there, but most aptly, you can go to the Patreon link right there on our website. So thank you for that. Thank you for considering that. And on our show today, Richie, Idiot of the Week. And as you know, we were off for a month, so I have a lot of stored up ideas which may come out. I have lots of ammo for you in the Idiots of the Week.
Pent up or stored up?
Pent up, stored up.
All the above?
Both of them, and maybe even some ad-libbing of some other things that are bothering me. I can get cranky once in a while.
No, I've never seen that.
Then we're going to pose the question, are we going to war with Iran? And this has been in the news a lot lately. We actually were going to do this show a little bit later, but we moved it up because they're basically boarding British ships and blockades and all this kind of stuff, and Trump's threatening them. Lots of things to talk about on Are We Going to War with Iran? And then we're going to conclude the episode with an old-time favorite. It's like the Grand Old Opry. Opry? Yeah,
Opry.
Opryland. That's right. The Crawler Wiki
Wow,
is
it's
back.
It's back,
By
folks.
by popular demand. We're going to conclude the show with the Crawler Wiki. And if you're not familiar with the Crawler Wiki, it's where Rich tells us the origin of certain common sayings. So you will be entertained, I promise you. All right, Richie, any comments before we go forward?
It seems like Iran, however you want to pronounce it, is provoking us. Although I'd say, aren't we in a perpetual war with the Middle East? Iran being one of the 10 we're always at war with. So this one's a little more interesting because there seems to be some bravado on their part, almost tempting us to do something that's going to infuriate the world. Like they believe if we retaliate or respond or strike, the world will be on their side as we are viewed as global warmongers and global police.
Well, it might surprise you, Richie. I have some alternative viewpoints to the common viewpoint about Iran, and we will discuss that as we get going. But
Can we get one thing straight? Are we going to go with Iran or Iran?
I call it Iran, but you can call it Iran, Iran, whatever. John McCain's famous warmongering, he actually sung the song, Bomb, 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 Iran. Bomb, 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 Iran. Yeah, John McCain.
Sang bomb, 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 Iran?
Yeah. Like he thought it was funny, making a joke about bombing Iran because he's a warmonger, but a good senator and a good person in the war, but he was a warmonger. So that's off subject. All right, Richie, I have some great, maybe even, I'm setting the bar high, idiots of the week. Clay County, Missouri. When tracking down a suspect, law enforcement might use a canine to track a scent. This was not necessary in a recent arrest in Missouri. According to Clay County Sheriff's Office over the weekend, Liberty Police were searching for a person who a felony warrant for arrest had been issued. The person was wanted for possession of a controlled substance. The suspect had hid to avoid police, but apparently let out a fart so loud that it gave away his hiding spot.
You can't make this stuff up.
Quote, "We've got to give props to the Liberty PD for using their senses to sniff him out." That was a Facebook post. All right, number 2, Bournemouth, England. A retired jockey died when she fell onto an eco-friendly metal drinking straw, which impaled her eye.
Oh, my God.
Elena Struthers Gardner, 60, who was known as Lena, suffered brain injuries in the accident at her home. She was carrying a mason jar-style drinking glass with a screw-top lid in her kitchen when she collapsed. The 10-inch stainless steel straw entered her left eye socket and pierced her brain.
I'm horrified.
Her death led to a coroner warning that metal drinking straws should never be used with a lid that's fixed them in place. And, quote, great care should be taken while using them.
So don't run with scissors and let's repollute the oceans with plastic.
So it is evidently hazardous to be an environmentalist. All right, I've taken creative license and have a third one today. And by the way, let me just say this. I'm going to segue a little bit. This is an honorable mention one off the record. The Republicans, I couldn't let this go without being mentioned. The Republicans, people out there that claim to be Republicans for small government and limited fiscal conservatism. The Republicans last week, with the help of Nancy Pelosi, of course, and Chuck Schumer, they passed a debt ceiling deal. And if you're not keeping up with the news, it added $320 billion more to the budget and suspended the debt ceiling. Remember the old days we used to raise the debt ceiling up to a certain, and then it would, 9 months later, they have to raise it again, which was kind of a farce. They just suspended it. There is no debt ceiling. They can just spend whatever they want until after the 2020 elections.
So for our fans I have a lot of friends that are polarly, dynamically opposed to each other on both the left and the right. For those that don't understand fully, and I have to admit I don't understand fully either, who initiates and drives the removal of the debt ceiling and who has to sign off on it?
it's my thesis, Rich, and this is probably repetitive after so many episodes, but my thesis is that I left the Republican Party because I finally figured out that the Republicans were just a little less bad than Democrats when it comes to spending and growing government, and they just spend on different things than Democrats. But they're both parties, the duopoly as I refer to them, are both heading us over a cliff. And maybe the Democrats would do it quicker, but they're both bad. And, here's a perfect example. If you claim to be a Republican for limited government and fiscal responsibility, there's no way you can be a Republican nowadays. It's totally out the window since George W. Bush, and Trump has blown out deficits. They're trillion-dollar deficits. He already added $4 trillion to the national debt. It's a disgrace. So they're for vote Libertarian, folks. I didn't even get to my third nominee yet.
Are you happy I gave you that little segue to
I appreciate
fit
that.
your libertarian
I had to
message
vent a
in?
little bit. All right.
Okay.
Pamplona, Spain. This might be the best one, Rich. The desire to have a selfie as a souvenir from running with the Bulls in Spain turned into a near-death experience for an American lawyer, and he says he'll never forget it. Jamie Alvarez, who was in Spain with his wife, son, and daughter to attend his son's soccer tournament, says he ran most of the 900 yards course ahead of the Bulls, but by the time they entered the bullfighting plaza at the end, the pack of animals had caught up to him. He said he had climbed a fence for safety and returned to the arena only to shoot a short video when he thought the danger had passed. He wanted a 5-second video scene to say, "Here I am, I did it." That's when the stray bull came at him running fast. The impact was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was like being hit by a car or a truck, Alvarez says. The bull had gored him in the neck. The joy and excitement of being in the bull ring quickly turned into a real scare for my life, he said, where he was recovering at the hospital where he was recovering from surgery. Doctors told Alvarez the bull's horn went deep into his neck and fractured part of his cheekbone. That it didn't hit his jugular vein or a major artery was described as beyond miraculous. His wife and daughters had warned him not to try the run, but Alvarez said he found the energy too strong to resist.
I'm sure he did. Wait,
so how many people have we had dying or near death with selfies?
Animal selfies.
A couple hanging over a train in India, the bear selfie. I mean,
selfies in general.
Those are my nominees, Richie. All good.
Is Alvarez, what state is he from? You said
he's from San Jose, California.
He's
a lawyer.
The reason why I ask is I'm surprised nobody from Florida this week. As my buddy Larry
we could just
Helms.
do a show on idiots from Florida.
Yeah, Larry Helms from Texas always loves to point out there's an abundance from Florida that never ends. So
those are your nominees, Richie. Editorialize away.
The guy farting to get caught by the police canine unit is outstanding. I mean, but you've had some tacos and
sometimes
quesadillas.
you just got to let it rip.
You eat a bowl of beans, it's almost impossible to stop, even with the threat of arrest. So that's just natural bodily function. The poor lady who impaled herself with a metal straw. Look, since we were kids, my grandmother said, never run down the hall with a pair of scissors.
Why do you think God invented plastic?
So, that one, and she's, elderly. She maybe tripped or slipped. So that's just an unfortunate mistake. She was trying to go green. The Republicans...
She went steel.
She went steel instead, which is another... There's probably more coal and greenhouse gas created by creating steel than than plastic. But the Republicans, the government, look, we're always going to have issues with that. So that's just ongoing. That's impossible to fix.
No, it isn't. That's my thesis. It's not impossible.
It's impossible.
It's attitudes like yours that have us where we are.
It's impossible to fix in our day in life. You're a star in the universe. And I don't mean a star in a good way. You're a little tiny blink of light trying to change the world.
I'm a speck.
You're a speck.
I'm a slight speck.
You're a grain of sand.
I'm a slight of build speck.
You're a flea. All right? So stop with this, but I do love your enthusiasm. Hands down. Listen, folks, if an animal can kill you, if a selfie can kill you, if hanging off a cliff or a train or a building
or a bear
can kill you, My general rule of thumb for anybody is if you do an activity where one little mistake can kill you, you don't do it, no matter how much energy you get from it. Right?
I feel like you've said this speech like 5 or 6 times
more
already.
than that. I mean, I was getting energy. I was doing that trick where you catch a bullet in your teeth. And I was getting so much energy from doing it. And then I was studying a video on how to prepare for it, and the guy that was best at it died from it. So I didn't pursue it.
Maybe you asked that time you asked me to shoot you out of a cannon. Remember that?
Right. I did. I saw a video where the guy
Jumped Niagara Falls on a motorcycle.
All these people die in the end.
So Jamie Alvarez.
Jamie Alvarez from California in Pamplona, Spain.
He's our idiot.
I'll send him I'll send the hospital and his family $1.
All right, folks. So we're gonna shift now to war with Iran. Are we going to war with Iran? And let me tell you how this bubbled up, Richie, into a show episode. As you know, I was on vacation in Ireland with some guys golfing, and we were sitting around a table, and I guess this subject of Iran came up, and I, of course, espoused my libertarian view of why we even messing with these people over there, and the response from most of the people at the table, now these are probably mostly Republican guys, was, well, they're evil. They're evil. They're spreading terror all over the Middle East, so we can't allow them to have a nuclear weapon. So it made me realize that, maybe a lot of folks, and I'm not saying these specific guys, but maybe a lot of folks have been fooled or misled by our relentless media attack on Iran for really since 1979 when they quote took our hostages. And I doubt that most of our listeners really understand all the history there that's behind this conflict. So let's talk about it a little bit today. I know hopefully we'll educate some folks, maybe even you, Richie.
Let's do it.
So first of all, Iran is also known as Persia. And the Persian Empire is started about 7,000 BC. It's one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. They're very proud people. They didn't become Iran or Iran until 1930s. And the more recent history between the U.S. and Iran and the conflicts really started back in 1951. Iran elected this prime minister. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh, and he was not friendly to the United States. And let's also place the reality here that Iran's major part of its economy is oil. And back in that time, the U.S. had no real oil reserves and hadn't developed fracking or whatever. We were reliant on the Middle East for oil, mostly Saudi Arabia, but also Iran. So we wanted to have influence over Iran. So what did we do?
What did we do?
Our CIA organized a coup, and they overthrew this democratically or somewhat democratically elected prime minister, and we installed our stooge, the Shah of Iran. This was in 1953. This is well known. Go look it up. We, the CIA, organized a coup and put our guy in place, and he was a dictator. There's no other way to say it. That's what happened. And everyone thinks that the recent history started with the Iranian just, out of nowhere, this Islamic revolution in 1979, they took our hostages and held them for 400 days. Everyone thinks in America that's the storyline that they've been told. But imagine it in our country if we had elected someone, Trump, and another country organized a coup and got rid of that person and put their own person, who was a dictator, in charge. I mean, just that alone ought to piss off a lot of Iranians, right? And they have long memories. This is a 7,000 BC civilization. They don't think in years like we do. They think in generations. So before we go any further and talk about more modern day, what do you think about that history, Rich, and how many Americans know that history?
You know how many Americans know that history? 3. And they all teach Middle Eastern history. No, I didn't know that. I guarantee
Go look it up.
99.5% of everyone I know, and you know I have thousands of friends.
Yes, and they're all listeners and soon to be patrons.
Hopefully. I guarantee none of them know that.
Right.
We don't do a lot of in-depth Middle East history studying in school, maybe for this very reason. But, you know, when you do world history, world cultures, whatever you want to call it, social studies, it usually involves the major events around
The Greeks, the Romans,
the Romans, you know,
Hammurabi's Code.
all that stuff, right? And maybe there's a reason for it. So, no, I didn't know that. You know, it reminds me that, you know, in 2019, there's still a lot of race issues, race riots, race conflicts, you know, Caucasian, African American, and, you know, myself included, say, hey, look, this stuff isn't happening to them today like it did in the times of slavery. But those times of slavery usually have relative connections to current day people that have this memory, have this animosity, were mistreated egregiously, and it still carries into today because of the tight history. And that's only, 100 to 250 years ago.
Right.
So this Iran thing, which I was not aware of, it's, you know, that's even more modern day. And no,
Right.
Nobody knows it and may help. I'm not going to become a Middle Eastern sympathizer,
Right.
but it does help put things in perspective.
Right. And there's more to this. And by the way, let me just say this as a caveat. The current government in Iran, which is an Islamic republic, is not a good government. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying there's another perspective here that we need to have, as opposed to just saying Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism everywhere. And I guess the best line I heard about this many years ago is, what's the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter? Just a matter of what side you're on, right?
Yeah.
So you know, I'm sure that a lot of people in Iran and other places around the world consider us terrorists and sponsors of terror because we're meddling everywhere in the world. All right, let's go on. So they take our hostages. Ronald Reagan comes in. They free the hostages, yada, yada, yada. And then what happens is it's impossible to talk about Iran without also talking about Iraq. So after the hostages release, we started to pump up and fund Saddam Hussein with weapons and money so that Iraq would fight Iran. It was a proxy war that we funded, and we meaning our allies in Europe as well. We provided them with the chemical weapons that we later came and looked for. We were the ones who were backing Saddam Hussein and brought him and increased his military strength so that he could fight Iran, who was our enemy for taking our hostages, right? So it's a crazy, mixed up soup, but it's because we're meddling everywhere, right? So the Iran-Iraq war goes back and forth for 8 years. No real result. The borders all get put back right where they were again. And then Iraq invades Kuwait. We actually, by the way, just a little side note here, everyone thinks that it was a big surprise to us that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and George Bush said, this will not stand. Our ambassador to Iraq, April Glaspie was her name, and you can look this up. She actually told the Iraqi government in the days preceding their invasion of Kuwait that we have no opinion on Arab-to-Arab conflict like your border disagreement with Kuwait. So essentially, the U.S. Representative there told them we weren't going to mess with them if they invaded Kuwait because it's their own problem. And then when they did it, the American government couldn't believe it. They were actually just bluffing. And then George Bush went in and got this coalition and expelled them from Kuwait. But anyhow, I digress. The next thing that happened was we shot down, I don't know if you know this, but we shot down an Iranian airliner, the USS Vincennes, shot down a civilian airliner in Iranian waters. This was in, when was it? I forget, 1989 or something like that. But a U.S. destroyer was in Iranian territorial waters. An airline was going to Africa or something, Iranian airline with 290 people on board, including 66 children. We shot it out of the sky. And that's another thing that Americans don't realize is we're imagine an Iranian or a Russian, Chinese, whatever. Imagine a Chinese warship in our territorial waters off of New York. A Airbus takes off out of JFK, and a Chinese plane blows it. A Chinese ship blows it out of the sky with 66 children on it and 290 people. Iran remembers these types of things. You know what I mean? So, like, we kind of say, oh, oops, that was an accident. You know, but why were we there?
Why was that plane shot down?
They thought it was a hostile Iranian warplane, but it was its beacon was on this civilian frequency. It was a total mistake. But anyhow, that's just one little thing. Now, the last thing is move more to current day is we are now more friendly with the Sunni Arabs. Iran and Iraq are more Shia majority, and the Sunnis are now our friends because the Shia are our enemies because Iran is our enemy. So now our friends are Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Turkey and Syria. These are all Sunni majority countries and leaders, and these are bad people too. And
they might be the most corrupt of all of them.
Well, the irony is the Sunnis in Iraq are the ones that are the Al Qaeda in Iraq or ISIS. The Shia now control Iraq, which is a benefit to Iran, and the Sunnis are now the rebels that we're fighting. But that's just in Iraq and in Syria, and then in the Sunni leaders in other countries are our friends. I guess my point is, if you're listening to this, you're probably saying, what a mess. And that's my point. Why are we over there? Why are we involved with these people? Why are we trying to control them? Why are we, if anything, we're the ones messing with all these countries. And yet most Americans think Iran is the one sponsoring terror in all these countries. We're doing the exact same thing. We're meddling in everyone else's business. It's a mess.
Wow, I saw some emotion there. You maybe even
right. I haven't even got to the Iran deal and what we're doing.
I may have to wipe some spit off my cheek.
That was just a lot of background information on this whole mess.
This is something that most people don't realize, but it's now so twisted and so layered and so convoluted and complex. I think, yes, most people focus on 9/11 and what's happened since then. And
Iran had nothing to do with 9/11.
Right, but that's, from our living quickly without looking at details, don't let the details get in the way of a good story. We just focus on anything Middle East connected. It's all terrorism, and we have to do something about it, and we have to prevent future terrorism, and we have to be in there, because if we're not, it's going to spread, and other countries are going to harbor terrorists and develop terrorism and fund terrorism.
They'll come here, right?
And they'll come back here,
I fundamentally reject that argument. That's the argument made by the neocons and the military-industrial complex to keep us at war everywhere in the world. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me if the whole argument was they attacked us on 9/11. They, meaning Saudi Arabia, by the way, it was 16 Saudi Arabians that the reason that there was 16 Saudi Arabians or 15, whatever it was, the majority of them were Saudi Arabians that attacked us. They were ticked off at both the U.S. and Saudi Arabia because the U.S. was bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi Arabia. So they didn't like the fact that Americans were using bases and actually in their country with military equipment bombing other Arab countries. And the whole Palestine issues with Israelis as well as ticked them off. But this whole argument that they bombed us on 9/11 and flew the planes into our buildings on 9/11 because they didn't like our way of life, it just doesn't make any sense.
So let me ask you this, because it's kind of like, and I've watched and read, all the mafia stories and history of the mafia in the U.S. and all the movies and books. It's fascinating, but it gets to the point where, like, this family retaliates against this family, retaliates back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And no one even remembers who threw the first stone.
Yeah.
And, two wrongs don't make a right. But once you're in that circular, never-ending, perpetual motion, it's really tough to stop on either side.
Especially if you have I've said it on this show many times, we have a bias towards war in this country. I don't know what it is. It's been expertly marketed by the military-industrial complex and supporting the troops is now synonymous with supporting policy of interventionism and imperialism all around the world, which I totally reject. You can support troops and don't like the policy of imperialism that we have. And you're right. It's been ingrained in our culture that we are supposed to be this policeman of the world. And I don't understand it. I don't know how we got here. It was never like that prior to World War II and even really up to Vietnam, really. That's kind of where it started. It was, we started getting involved where we shouldn't be.
So let me get you back on track because you've gone off on tangents, which have been interesting and compelling. But if I were to do that, you'd shout at me for getting off track. But you is entertaining, and I'm thanking you for doing it. There's a bit of a whatever you call dichotomy there. So let's fast forward to today and the potential war we have facing us as we speak.
Right. Okay. So the more recent history is, that Iran's been labeled as this evildoer in sponsoring Hezbollah and all these places in the Middle East. We put sanctions on them, and Trump has doubled down on sanctions, including we are sanctioning companies that do business with Iran, even not necessarily Iran itself, but companies that do business. So we've crippled their economy, which in my mind, sanctions and blockades are almost like an act of war, but that's a different tangent. Obama tried to limit Iran's nuclear ambitions by cutting this Iran nuclear deal, which Trump obviously pulled us out of. And most of Europe, our allies in Europe, disagreed with that. And by the way, it wasn't just the U.S. that had signed that Iran nuclear deal. It was the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, so that's U.S., U.K., France, China, Russia, and then Germany also signed on. So there was unanimity amongst the biggest nations on earth that this Iran deal was a good thing. We pulled out. Most of the other countries disagree with that. They were trying to do business with Iran, and now these extra sanctions that Trump's put on has really hurt the Iran economy, and they're getting desperate. So I think what's happening is they're trying to act tough. And you see this with Putin in Russia and Xi in China. The dictators have to act tough against other nations when the economy is doing poorly so that they can defend themselves. And that's kind of what Iran's doing. They're starting to attack boats. They're boarding vessels going through the Strait of Hormuz, and which is where a lot of the world's oil flows through this narrow strait there that Iran controls. And they're being provocative. They shot down a U.S. drone, about a month and a half ago, and Trump decided not to retaliate on that. But you can see where Iran's getting desperate. Their leaders their civilians are probably getting restless because their economy stinks. The leaders have to look powerful. So it's all ego-driven. And the U.S. wants to have control of Persia, which they probably, all these neocons and John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, they're warmongers, and they can't get over the fact that when Iranian hostages were taken and the Shah of Iran was deposed, we lost control of Persia. And these neocons can't get over the fact that we don't control Persia anymore. And they want a war. And that's the sad thing is this culture of war is just, they're beating the drum. It sounds a lot like Iraq before we went in there, or Libya, or Syria, or Pakistan, or Afghanistan. I mean, it's just so tiring. Aren't we tired of war?
I'm so tired of listening to you right now. Yes,
I'm talking a lot today. I agree.
I am tired. You're making me tired.
You're going to talk a lot during Crawler Wiki, though.
Well, I'm going to, we may run out of time at this rate.
You may be retired by the time.
I may be off in my car by the time you do that segment.
Taking the gas pipe.
So,
it's a little bit of a rant against our war culture with Iran as the subject.
I get it.
I'm worried about it going to war.
I don't know what to do. I don't even know what the answer is. If you think about it, I'll go back to the mafia. You attack me, I attack you. After so many layers and years and decades of, well, you killed somebody, my family, I'm going to kill somebody. By the time it's like, how do you stop it? Where does it stop? Why did you you don't even remember where this started. I think this is so far gone and this ship has left the port, or this ship has sailed 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago, 7,000 years ago, I don't see anybody being the bigger man because there's so much hatred and saying, all right, we'll stop our side.
Right.
Now we expect you to stop yours.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I don't see that in the short term. Although I'm hopeful that the American public and even Trump has shown signs of not being willing to get into additional wars, although he's over there meddling. I'm hopeful that between Afghanistan, which has been 17, 18 years we've been there, we're still in Iraq, we're still in Pakistan, we're still in Syria, we're still in Libya, we're still in Somalia, we're in all these places all over the place. I'm hopeful that the populace of the U.S. is so war-weary that we wouldn't want any part of a war with Iran. And I know that I've read lots of things about the Marines and the Army don't want any part of a land war with Iran. I mean, it's 3 times the size of Iraq. Iraq was a total cluster. We all acknowledge that now. You know, we were, quote, going to be welcomed as liberators, and it turned into 5,000 dead and 100,000 maimed, and it's still going on today. We created ISIS in Iraq. So Iran's 3 times bigger. Their military's better. They have more mountains. It would be a total quagmire if we tried to go to war with them. And, you know, the Navy and the Air Force always say, well, we can bomb them. And, that never works. You got to go in on the ground. And it's just, I'm just worried that 5 years from now, we're going to be at it again in the Middle East with another war, with a war we can't win.
Well, hey, look, I'm a big fan of our military. I have many friends and family that have served in the military, and some are still in the military. And the purpose of our military is still top 3 important things in life that, a lot of it got us to our freedom. But I would even say some of the folks, especially you talk to Vietnam vets, they're like, why were we there? Oh. And there seems to be ego involved to constantly prove that we have the strongest, toughest, most advanced military, and we need to prove it on a regular basis. But if you look at the history of fighting wars on foreign soil, especially incredibly challenging terrains.
Since World War II, they've been disasters.
They're disasters because not that these people are tougher than us or hand-to-hand battle will win. Our guys in equal situations will win. But when you add desert, heat, snow, mountains, rivers, tropical rainforests, insects, disease, live animals.
How about the most important one? You're on someone else's homeland. I mean, I'd be fighting to the death. If our country was invaded, we'd all be fighting to the death to expel them. And that's what these other countries do. They don't want, foreigners on their soil.
Well, it's a fight to the death mentality. It's also a home game.
Yeah.
I mean, these people have lived there for centuries. They know every nook and cranny.
Yeah.
They know where to step and where not to.
Yeah.
It's hard to bomb the mountains. There's plenty of places you can hide in mountains and not get. So
it's a false premise that we go to war on most of these instances.
I've read a ton of Navy SEAL books, and it's fascinating. But even though the best trained military in the world, the toughest men in the world, their advantages are dramatically reduced and equalized when you're on foreign soil in these tough terrains. So,
right.
Yeah, it's a shame. A lot of guys go into this and they're going to get killed or they're going to get maimed for life, and they take orders.
They do. They take orders from civilians, and in Donald Trump's case, he's never even served in the military, so I don't think he has a realistic aspect of how horrible war is. Last thing I want to mention in this segment, Richie, is Israel. Israel always plays into the discussion with Iran because, Iran's former leaders said that Israel should be, quote, wiped off the map, or something. It doesn't deserve to exist. And other Arab countries have said similar things because they didn't like the fact that Israel was established there in, 49 or whatever. They say it's on Palestinian land, yada, yada, yada. And the reality is that in many ways, the U.S. and Israel have such a tight relationship, and we have a protectorate relationship with Israel, even though Israel is the only country in the Middle East other than Pakistan that actually has nuclear weapons. So I don't really think Israel has that much to worry about. Plus, they have a great military. They could easily defend themselves against Iran. But it always seems like Israel's part of this equation in our relationship and our animosity towards Iran. So what do you think about that? Why is Israel so important in our country?
Not to oversimplify, but they're like a mini U.S. plopped right in the middle of this so-called, group of terrorists or circular country allies of terrorism and evil, and
they're a quote democracy amongst all dictatorships, basically.
right. So it's almost like you have this superhero smack in the middle that's got completely our back and is in agreement with us, and they have nuclear weapons, and without them, all hell will break loose, all will fall apart. So whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it seems like it's the Incredible Hulk in the middle of other evil people that keep us afloat and from getting more involved and more in depth in insanity.
Last thing, do you think it has anything to do with the biblical interpretation and how a lot of people think prophecy about Israel? Do you think that, because we're largely still a Christian nation, do you think that has anything to do with the I'll call it an over-importance of Israel in our society?
No, I mean, I teach Sunday school, as you know, to
Right.
little kids, and I'm in a church youth group, and I talk to a lot of adults. Nobody even knows that. I mean,
Oh, really?
nobody even, again, that's just history and even biblical history that's beyond people's, basic understanding and how they study the Bible. So I would say no.
Okay. All right. So my final comments on this segment is that I am hopeful that our recent history of what's the best word? War fatigue over all these things ever since 9/11 and fighting all these wars everywhere I'm hopeful that will preclude us from going to war with Iran, but I think it's going to be rocky. I wouldn't even be surprised to have Trump do like a wag the dog type thing where he starts a little skirmish with Iran just to try to help him in his election. Presidents have done that in the past. And by the way, you mentioned Vietnam earlier. Watch the Ken Burns documentary, folks, on Vietnam, how every single president from Eisenhower up through Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, they all lied about Vietnam consistently just for political reasons. It was horrible. And so this happens, and I don't want it to happen again. So that's my comment. I'm hopeful, but I think it's going to be rocky over the next couple of years. What's your thoughts, Richie?
Final comment is we almost get backed into a corner where we have to show that we're not wusses, right? It's even you're taught, talk to the bully, negotiate with the bully, reason with the bully, but at the end of the day, you may have to fight. You may to.
But who's the bully, Iran or us?
What I mean is, if Iran were to continue to provoke and board ships and do things to provoke us, it almost gets to the point where even though two wrongs don't make a right, we almost have to stand up for ourselves because we're the U.S.
Provoke us when our ships are right off their shore. And
It's the mafioso mentality. It doesn't matter. It
does.
It doesn't matter to Trump's going to have to stand up.
Why is it our responsibility? And by the way, just as an aside, why do 8 countries in the world have nuclear weapons? Why are we to say whether they can have nuclear weapons or not? If they want to defend themselves versus Israel, they should be able to.
We did a show on this. Go back to why is the U.S. the police of the world? It's complicated, but I think at some point Trump's going to have to prove to the U.S. and the blue-collar nation and our allies, like, we're not just going to take this after the 5th or 6th or 10th incident, and that's the problem. He will feel compelled to stand up to the bully, in this case, Iran at the moment.
By the way, speaking of Trump, Rich, the issue solved. Today, President Trump declared that he's the least racist person in the world. So if we ever weren't sure, we now know he's the least racist person in the world.
How many people in the world?
8 billion or so. All right, folks, we got to move on to the Kroller Wiki. It's one of our favorite segments. And we mentioned earlier, Rich is going to tell us the origin of 3 popular sayings. And the first one, Richie, go the extra mile.
You know what's interesting, Mark?
You can call me Mark.
Can I call you Mark?
Yeah.
I know a little bit about everything, but I'm not an expert in anything. So I've studied.
Mile wide, inch deep.
Yep, I am definitely an inch deep. So this is interesting. I love Greek and Roman history. I've been to Italy. I've been to Rome. I've seen the Colosseum. I've been to Athens. And it's funny you should mention Iran being Persia.
Right.
So I don't know. And forgive me, any historians listening, if I don't quite get the facts exact, but roughly, 500 BC, Greece and other nations were always at war with Persia, and they were always trying to get surrounding countries to group together to fight Persia. Persia was a very powerful empire and military, and a really tough Hermocrates, or some really tough Greek name, was a professional runner and part of the army, and he did a lot of what I'll call ultra marathons. They had this poor guy running 140 miles here to try to get Sparta or Athens or somebody to join whatever extra city to join the fight. In this particular case,
because there was no planes back then, like there was during the American Revolution, right?
No planes, trains, or automobiles.
Trump thought there was planes in airports.
There were boats, but the boats don't work across land. So this Hermocrates, or whatever his name is, they actually beat the Persians in marathon, and they were outnumbered 4-1 or something, and they great military strategy. They were proactive. So he ran roughly 26 miles to Athens to give the news. Now, picture a guy in bare feet with armor on in the middle of summer.
Brutal.
They think it was August.
That Athens heat, too. It's brutal.
No Gatorade. Gatorade wasn't invented to 250 BC.
Right.
He got to 25 miles, literally dehydrated. Organs were shutting down, bleeding. Feet were bleeding. He's going delirious. But he had to get that last mile. And when he ran into the assembly, he shouted to the Athens people, "We have won. We have won in marathon." And he literally died. And one of the senators turned to the other guy and said, "Oh, my God, he made it the last mile."
It's the extra mile. I thought you were going to say he came into the Colosseum, and they said, "Oh, no, this is not the right place. You have to go down the road a mile."
That would have been a better ending.
Surprisingly, that's pretty close, Rich, but not exactly. By law, a Roman soldier could force anyone to carry his equipment 1 mile. In Matthew 5:41, Jesus told his followers, "If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles with him." So that's where the "go the extra mile" came from.
Wow.
Beyond, you might want to use that in your Sunday school class. Beyond the pale, Rich. Beyond the pale. We've not a common saying, but we've all heard it. What's beyond the pale? Where did that originate?
Well, there's multiple definitions of the word pale.
P-A-L-E. This one is
Right. So there's like "Whiter Shade of Pale," the famous song.
right.
Do you know who sang that?
Moody Blues.
Very good. So a pale,
Justin Hayward.
a pale can mean a color. Like you're turning pale because you're sick. A pail
Right.
can be also a bucket.
Right.
Right. Hey, take the pail down to the ocean. We're going to build a sandcastle. You can become impaled.
We've heard that earlier today.
Right. So
With a straw.
With a straw. So it's a combination of all three.
Okay. Beyond the pale.
Beyond the pale. So back again, I don't know exactly when in history, but it was BC.
Historians can disagree a little bit.
Right. So it might have even been another one of these long distance runners that was part of the army. You had to go far to get water, right? And again, you would send your oldest boy or most in shape boy to go to go a couple miles to go get water with a pail.
Right.
By the time you got back, you were very pale. And when these dehydrated, pale people carrying a pail often fell, there were sharp edges.
They were impaled.
They became impaled, and
It's
therefore
a plethora of pails.
it was a big deal to go beyond
The pale.
the pail.
That is brilliant, brilliant work. Not true, but whatever. Originally, a pale was an area under the authority of a certain official. There's another definition of pale. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the English king ruled Dublin and the surrounding area known as the Pale. Anyone, quote, beyond the Pale was seen as savage and dangerous. So you are beyond the Pale. You're also savage and dangerous.
So I was beyond the right answer.
Yeah, but you did tie together lots of pails. I like that.
Thank you.
All right, last one. Blue blood, Rich. Some people have accused Robert Mueller, I did it on a text string earlier this week, of being a blue blood because he went to prep schools in Princeton and also New Hampshire prior to testifying before Congress recently. But anyhow, blue blood, Rich, where did that originate?
Well, again, a lot of historical context here. Through the years...
Did it involve a runner by chance?
There was no runner involved in this one. Although I should have probably came up with a story that was. Throughout history, there's been a great divide between the aristocrats or the elite and the plebes or the poor, and it's always been a battle. Right? The entitled or the privileged against the poor people, the slaves, the workers versus the people sitting around.
Continuing today with our Democratic nominees for president.
Right? So I would say probably when England was a powerful world military country and a great influence in the world, there's a rumor that your blood is actually blue running through your veins until you're cut, and then it turns red when the oxygen hits it. I believe that's been proven false. But back in the day, when there were arguments or the elite in England killing or thwarting riots and upheavals from the poor trying to get their fair share, just like or anywhere in the UK, that Braveheart was Scotland fighting and Ireland fighting the English. There was a gentleman who was a terrible man, terrible dictator, emperor, king of England, and
not Longshanks like in Braveheart.
Similar,
okay.
But similar to Longshanks. He was captured, and when they executed him, somebody said, "Look, they are different than us. His blood is flowing blue."
Blue blood? That's
blue
where it
blood.
came from.
He's a blue blood.
You know what? I will give you credit for this one because you're really close. For centuries, the Arabs occupied Spain, but they were gradually forced out during the Middle Ages. The upper class in Spain had paler skin than most of the population as their ancestors had not intermarried with the Arabs. As they had pale skin, the blue blood running through their veins was more visible. So you're on the right track there. Of course, all blood is red and sometimes looks blue when running through the veins. So blue-blooded came to mean upper class.
Aha!
So even though you had the geography a little wrong, I think you had it right with the blue blood, and I will give you full credit on that one.
I get 2 out of 3 today?
Yeah, you got 2 out of 3. Although the second one was way off, but you tied together uses of pale and impaled very well.
Thank you.
All right. So as we conclude, make sure you listen next episode when we talk about self-awareness. Rich, I think you and I are both pretty self-aware. And in fact, by the way, most people, 95% of people believe they are self-aware, but research indicates only about 15% of people really are.
Could we be part of the 15%?
We could be. You're actually very self-aware, except for recollections of your high school basketball career. That's when you revise history. But yeah, we'll give you a break on that. we'll get into that off air, I'm sure. But anyhow, so we're going to talk about that and all of its ramifications next episode. And as always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See y'all next episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Please download, subscribe, share, and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and also our website.